Hello, Bible readers. Today we're going to finish the Jacob narrative altogether by looking at chapter 33, verse 18, and go all the way through chapter 36. There's two big chunks here, chapter 33, 18 to 34, and then 35, chapter 35, and chapter 36. The first chunk includes the rape of Dinah, and then vengeance from the sons of Jacob. Considering what it means and why it happens, makes more sense when we compare and contrast Israel's behavior in this rape of Dinah section to chapters 35 and 36 and see what happens there. Both chunks are concerned with the question of how Israel can survive and be faithful in the promised land. The Jacob narrative up to now has been about the flight of Jacob from Esau and then Jacob's return to Esau and Jacob's homecoming to the land. It's been a story about a fugitive that God still kept promises to. That was one of the main points of the Jacob narrative, that God can remain faithful even to a scheming fugitive. At this point now, though, Jacob returns prosperous, returns with a blessing. But now Jacob can't keep running. He and his sons, instead of figuring out how to survive on the run, now they got to figure out how to thrive where they are. Interesting problem to have, right? And it's a problem we still think about. It reminds me of an Avett Brothers song, The Weight of Lives, Weight of Lies. They sing, and I won't sing it to you, I'll just read the lyrics. The weight of lies will bring you down and follow you to every town, because nothing happens here that doesn't happen there. When you run, make sure you run to something and not away from, because lies don't need an airplane to chase you anywhere. Jacob's been running, but finally he has run to something and not just away from someone or something. Jacob has purchased land. He's built an altar. But the question is, how now to be here when there are other groups of people already here? So the first chunk of text we have tells us that Shechem, a prince of this region, takes Dinah by force. Jacob and his sons interpret what happened as defilement. It's a term found nowhere else in Genesis. It is a special level of awful, referring to ritual impurity, like a soul stain. This kind of defilement is more deeply damning than anything we have in our own culture. So their judgment against what Shechem did is not just a moral judgment, like, oh, it was simply a bad choice that can be forgiven or forgotten. It's an act that permanently changes Dinah to be outrageously unclean. Another Hebrew word is used too that highlights how deep an issue this is. A word that, again, doesn't get used anywhere else in Genesis. Many interpret the word as folly. It denotes sexual violation. And again, it's one of these deep, big feel words. In contrast to these big feel words from Jacob's side, Hamor, Shechem's dad, is like, hey, let's work it out. Turns out Shechem, really liked Dinah. Why don't they get married? And why don't we all allow ourselves to intermarry? And so it's in good faith that he suggests a union of the peoples and seeks to cooperate. Jacob's son, of course, agree, only to give in to vengeance. Brueggemann notes, they have no vision of social cooperation, ecumenical community, or even economic advantage, which these marriages would foster. They are blinded by vengeance, and they have coveted. They've coveted their religious peculiarity, not wanting anyone else to get in on it, and their moral rectitude, and they coveted the lives and property of their neighbors. This story poses hard questions to a community of faith. How do we deal with base feelings, economics, religious faithfulness, and ecumenical vision for those who believe differently from us? Like, how do we deal with all those things coming together? Brueggemann says it asks a community of faith to decide for faith in the midst of such convergences, feelings, economics, religiousness, and everyone else just trying to get along. faith must be able to live and move and decide with such tensions. I mean, it's a challenge for us still, right? So chapters 35 and 36 get at how faith is able to live and move and decide within such tensions. As much as the rape of Dinah story, this story knows that faithfulness in the land among the Canaanites, it's a risky and difficult business. But this text knows, as chapter 34 does not, that Israel cannot leave. Israel cannot kill all the Canaanites who are already there. Instead, Israel has to find a way to stay in this land with the Canaanites and still practice faithfulness. So how do they do it? Radical symbolization. The purity ritual we see in chapter 35, 1-4, is a perfect example of how Israel is going to work in the land with other people. Brueggemann says Israel engages in dramatic ritual activity as a mode of faithfulness. It is apparent that this ritual, this purity ritual, permits Israel to be Israel in the land. For Christians, baptism is like this. Strange ritual experiences form an alternative community which will be faithful. So here in this last bit of the Jacob narrative, we see a new community in the land, having learned not to simply stay by force, but instead carving out a way of being amidst lots of other unfaithful paths, which they'll be tempted by again and again and again in times to come. So for next time, as we move on from Jacob, scan the rest of the book of Genesis, because I'm going to offer an overview of chapters 37 through 50. That will be the Joseph narrative, the hidden call of God. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.